At 7:24 a.m. on the 25th of October, 1944, IJN Kumano was participating in the Battle off Samar when the Japanese Center Force was attacking Taffy 3, and suddenly the ship's bow was rocked by an explosion as a Mark 15 torpedo fired from the USS Johnston struck it and blew off the ship's prow. Captain Hitomi looked hopelessly as the bow of his ship collapsed ahead of frame 20. The ship's anchors were gone, the deck had collapsed downward in front of the bulkhead and was now dragging on the front of the ship, and the vessel was slowing down to 10 knots, veering off to port. Cruiser Division 7's commander, Vice Admiral Shirashi, was on board the Kumano, and since the ship was clearly out of action, the Suzuya hailed alongside Kumano so he and his staff could transfer to it. Once the Vice Admiral was safely aboard the Suzuya, Kumano got underway once again at roughly 15 knots, heading north towards the San Bernardino Strait. The rest of the day would pass along largely quiet for Kumano, and by 7 a.m. on the 26th of October, it was rounding the southern tip of Mindoro Island. However, by 8:50 a.m., the silence would come to an end as 23 aircraft from the USS Hancock would go on the attack, with Kumano being the target. A total of 3 direct bomb hits were scored. The first one struck the vessel off the side near the No. 6 boiler room, causing seams to open in the hull, and the No. 6 boiler room flooded. Another 1,000-pound bomb struck on the starboard side at the base of the funnel, damaging the uptakes and intakes to boiler rooms 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, resulting in steam pressure being lost in 7 of the 8 boilers. As a result, the ship lost power to its turbines and it began to slow to a stop. The third and final bomb struck the ship on the port side at the forward end of the superstructure. It destroyed both port 12.7 centimeter Type 89 high-angle guns and disabled the radar. Hancock's aircraft left the Kumano an immobilized, smoking hulk, and they believed that the ship was doomed to sink, but they couldn't have been more wrong. Damage control teams got to work in Kumano's engineering spaces, and before long, Boiler Room 1 was back online, and Kumano began moving once again at a steady 2 knots, and by 10 a.m. it had restored enough power to where it could operate at 10 knots. By 13:30, IJN Ashigara and Kasumi arrived to assist the Kumano, and the 3 ships continued on towards Coron, arriving there safely 3 hours later. Temporary mooring lines would hold Kumano in place, since it didn't have any anchors, while it awaited to be refueled, as it needed to proceed towards Manila, where emergency repairs could be made so the ship could make it back to Japan for permanent repairs. At 12:30 a.m. on the 27th of October, the ship cast from Coron, headed towards Manila on its own. A couple of hours after departing Coron, the IJN Okanami had located the Kumano and would escort it the rest of the way, and both ships safely arrived at Manila at 7:20 a.m. on the 28th of October. Over the course of the next week, emergency repairs were made, with a false bow being fitted to the front of the ship and 4 of its boilers being repaired, allowing it to operate at a top speed of 15 knots. At 1 a.m. on the 5th of November, Kumano, along with the damaged heavy cruiser Aoba, departed Manila en route for Takao, Formosa. On the 5th of November, Kumano and Aoba paired up with convoy MATA-31, which was comprised of 15 ships, and all 17 vessels proceeded together, and by 9 a.m. on the 6th of November, they were at Cape Borlino. Cape Borlino happened to be a hotspot for U.S. submarines, and the Japanese did not realize they had already been spotted by the USS Kataro, and by 9:10 a.m. it had launched a spread of torpedoes towards one of the heavy cruisers. Kataro's crew heard 3 distinct explosions, though they had dived, so they had no visual confirmation of any hits. On the Japanese side, they had seen a few explosions in the sea bearing 150 degrees, but no hits on any of the Japanese ships was scored. For an unknown reason, it appears the torpedoes fired by Kataro prematurely exploded. Half an hour later at 9:43, the USS Bream fired a spread of 4 torpedoes towards the Kumano, and the Japanese lookout spotted the torpedoes, and both Aoba and Kumano took evasive action. None of the torpedoes hit their marks, but Bream recorded 2 hits. An hour later, at 10:42, the USS Raton fired a spread of 6 torpedoes towards Kumano, and once again, Kumano's lookouts spotted the spread, and both Kumano and Aoba took evasive action, and no hits were scored, though Raton had recorded 3 hits. While Raton's torpedoes missed Kumano, having come from the port side, the Kumano found itself in the path of yet another submarine, the USS Ray, which fired a spread of torpedoes at 10:48 from the starboard side of Kumano, with Kumano being so bad out of position it was unable to avoid 2 of the torpedoes. The first torpedo struck the vessel underneath the bridge on the starboard side, while the second struck the forward starboard turbine room. The ship's machinery went offline, and it began to drift to a halt, and it began taking on a starboard list of 11 degrees. Kumano was now an easy target for the submarine, and Ray began to position itself to finish it off. However, in doing so, it ran into a coral and damaged its forward torpedo room and knocked its sonar offline, so Ray had to draw off the attack, and Kumano would be left afloat. The Dorumaru, which was a tanker, pulled alongside Kumano and passed tow lines, and before long, the Dorumaru was towing the Kumano at a steady 2 knots. At 11:30 a.m. on the 7th of November, Kumano arrived at Santa Cruz, where it moored, and was finally in the safety of the harbor. Once moored, Kumano's crew got right to work in repairing the ship's machinery and hull, and before long, the combined fleet had ordered Kumano to make way towards Takao as soon as possible. By the 19th of November, the Kumano's crew had 1 boiler and 1 turbine in action, so it seemed like Kumano would be getting underway within a few weeks. Unfortunately for the Japanese, Kumano would never depart Santa Cruz, as on the 25th of November, Task Force 38 began attacking land bases and ships around Santa Cruz. Task Force 38 by this point was well aware of the reputation of Kumano and its resilience to sinking, so 30 aircraft from Air Group 80 from the USS Ticonderoga were assigned to specifically finish off the Kumano. At 14:30, Kumano's lookouts spotted 2 groups of enemy aircraft closing in on the starboard side. Kumano's anti-aircraft guns raised into the sky and began shooting at the dive bombers, which were closing in off the starboard quarter, and before long, 4 500-pound bombs struck the ship. 2 had hit the bow, damaging the temporary bow and disabling turret 1. 1 had struck the aviation handling facilities, and 1 had struck the starboard side of the bridge, nearly killing Captain Hitomi, though he survived. The dive bombers had fulfilled their primary task, in distracting the anti-aircraft gunners, as, inland, torpedo bombers had appeared on the port side, and before long they had dropped their fish, scoring 5 direct hits. In order from bow to stern, the first torpedo struck the ship below turret 2, flooding the forward magazines. The second torpedo struck boiler room number 2, the third struck boiler room number 6, the fourth struck the forward port turbine room, and the 5th struck below turret 5, flooding the after magazines. During this attack, the bow was blasted off once again, ahead of turret number 1. Captain Hitomi quickly ordered counter-flooding, but at 14:48, the Kumano was listing 45 degrees to port, and nothing could be done, so he quickly amended that order and ordered abandoned ship. Captain Hitomi remained on the bridge as his heavy cruiser flipped upside down and sank by 15:15. Out of the crew of 1,036 men, 441 men would perish with the Kumano, while 595 would survive. Due to his actions in keeping the Kumano afloat for more than a month after having initially been damaged, Captain Hitomi was promoted to Rear Admiral. As for Kumano, on the 20th of January, 1945, it was removed from the operational register, bringing an end to its rather glorious career. With that having been said, there is nothing else to add onto this topic for today. So, if you have learned something new in this video, why not leave a like and a comment down below, and have a wonderful day.